welcome our new speakers. So our last panel is, in a way, the one of the most numerous in speakers, but also very ambitious in scope, because we're going to discuss the governance, the mainstreaming of governance, including democracy, civic space, and human rights throughout development cooperation system. And how do you do that? What does that mean? And what does it look like? And how do you report on its integration? And to address this final topic, we'll begin with two OECD colleagues. And first, Marc de Tollenaere. I don't know if he's here, policy analyst in the effective, inclusive and accountable institution unit, and in the governance secretariat in our directorate. And he'll briefly introduce us the way we can monitor this governance mainstreaming, the markers, and what are their trends, but also how are they currently being reformed. I'm not sure I see him, but maybe we can send him a message if he has trouble connecting. Otherwise, it will be my second colleague and even closer colleague, Jacqueline Wood, in our unit. She's the team lead on civil society, and she'll discuss some of the practices around civic space and, of course, the recommendation on enabling civil society that has just been adopted this summer for the Development Assistance Committee. And we'll then have the chance to listen to Mrs. Ursula Keller, who is a senior policy advisor and head of the governance unit at the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation. And she'll present the SDC's approach to governance as a transversal theme, its systemic approach, its steps and tools. And finally, we have our Latvian colleague, assistant at LAPAS, the Latvian Platform for Development Cooperation, will conclude this discussion with reflection from the Latvian perspective. As I do not see Marc, and maybe he has trouble connecting, Jacqueline, can I maybe ask you to begin?
Certainly, Sydney, I'd be happy to. Are you able to hear me all right?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. I've been listening this afternoon to some of the interventions. It's super exciting, I think, interesting stuff. So yes, please, thank you. And I will get going to share with you, that an essential part of the governance, human rights and democracy agenda in development cooperation relates to the protection of civic space, both in the digital world, as Marilyn presented earlier, but also in the physical world. And this is especially important today. Perhaps I don't need to tell you this, but I'll say it anyways, where there is considerable evidence of a trend to shrink the space for civil society to operate, a trend that is being exacerbated somewhat in the COVID-19 context. And there are different types of restrictions you see, a range from detention and harassment of civil society actors, to unnecessarily burdensome registration and reporting requirements, to constraints on civil society's ability to receive cross-border funding, restraints on peaceful assembly, and so on and so on. And next slide, sorry. So, at the same time that there are these restrictions, there is a strong belief among DAC members and well beyond DAC that civil society's engagement is critical to progress on the 2030 agenda and to building back better in, a variety of roles. Again, you're all familiar with, but it's worth reiterating that civil society plays roles in humanitarian assistance, in service provision, whether it's in health or education or other sectors. They're also sometimes innovators of new approaches, and significantly also civil society can act as channels for the voice and to help reach those people that are most at risk of being left behind. Civil society actors are also advocates for ambitious solutions to pressing global issues such as climate change. And I would like to quote the president of the Ford Foundation, who I heard speaking at the Paris Peace Forum recently. He said, "Civil society is the oxygen of democracy." I appreciated that quote, so I'm going to be reusing it. But in essence, what I'm getting at is that the space for civil society, so civic space, is by its nature an issue that cuts across, or should cut across, all development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. So if we move to the next slide, I will point out that, as has already been said, DAC members very much recognize this as seen in the recommendation on enabling civil society and development cooperation and humanitarian assistance that they adopted in summer, July 2021. So it was not long ago that it was adopted. And this recommendation, it has 3 pillars. Civic space is what the recommendation's first pillar about. So then I'm not sure who's animating the slides, but you could click your little arrow. There we go. So the first pillar is, I don't need to read them to you, but first is about civic space. The second is about how donors support and engage with civil society. And the third pillar is about how donors incentivize civil society to be accountable, with emphasis in particular on accountability at partner country level. Now, why these 3 pillars in this recommendation? Well, first, in the evidence gathering that we did in the lead up to this recommendation, including the paper that Marilyn presented and other sources, there was in 2020, we published the DAC members in civil society study that was based on survey responses, DAC data, et cetera, from that evidence, it was clear that first there were worrying trends in these areas of these 3 pillars. So I've already mentioned the trend around shrinking civic space, but also it was seen that DAC members are not always providing their support to civil society in the most effective manner, and that there are some shortcomings in sometimes in the effectiveness of civil society, their effectiveness in achieving results, and also in upholding accountability to their varied stakeholders. But secondly, in answer to why these 3 pillars, it was clear from the work that we were doing, the evidence gathering and the consultations and the discussions, that these 3 challenges are very much interlinked. They really affect each other. And so you couldn't really address one of them in isolation from the other. So I'll give you, an example. You might, as a donor, you might be concerned about shrinking civic space and choose an action around that, such as just support partner country institutions and capacities to protect civic space. But if you're not at the same time also paying attention to how you support and strengthen civil society in partner countries, so that they themselves can defend civic space, and so that they can have strong accountability relationships in partner countries, then you are really only addressing a piece of the puzzle. So the recommendation, the fact that it contains these 3 interlinked pillars really reinforces that it is a cross-cutting piece that needs to be looked at across development cooperation and humanitarian assistance agencies. So if we move to the next slide, it just gives a snapshot. So the next 3 slides will give you summary format of what the various provisions are under the 3 pillars. And I will share with you perhaps it might be interesting to hear some examples of how some DAC members are already addressing some of these provisions in the recommendation in their policies and programs. Obviously, I'm just going to give you a handful of examples, recognizing that the time also passing, and there's others that are going to speak that I'm looking forward to hearing. So first of all, let's give a first example. The first bullet on this first slide of Pillar 1, and it also is coincidentally relates to the first provision in the second slide, but we won't jump there yet. So a first provision is around developing clear policies on the value of an inclusive and independent civil society, the importance of protecting and promoting civic space, and on working with civil society. So some providers might have one policy document that covers all of these things, and that is meant to be a cross-agency or a cross-ministry document. But we also see coverage, policy coverage in various multiple policies in an agency or a ministry in a cross-cutting way. So I'll give you the example of Sweden, which has strategy for support to Swedish CSO via Swedish CSOs. They also have accompanying that document guiding principles for CEDA's engagement with all of civil society in its development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. And civil society also features in Sweden's overarching policy framework for Swedish development cooperation and humanitarian assistance, as well as in sector strategies. One obvious example being the strategy in the area of human rights, democracy, and rule of law. So that's one example. Another example, and I've heard it already a couple of times today, both from Marilyn and from Ida and from colleagues from Latvia and Estonia. You know, it's about taking steps to do no harm to civic space in partner countries. So in other words, when assessing or monitoring the impacts of projects, it's important to integrate considerations of possible unintended consequences on civic space. So, you know, say you might be looking to support private sector investment in digitalization. This provision is about making sure that that investment doesn't contribute to the use of digital technologies to surveil civil society or to propagate misinformation and disinformation targeting civil society. I think a lot of donors struggle. Let's say there's always work to do around this do no harm principle, which is really about policy coherence for development. But I will say that in the discussion and negotiations around the recommendation, there was a strong push to have this provision specifically included. So I think going forward, you know, we will be able to have more good practices of DAC members to share with you. If you go to the next slide has a summary form of the provisions under the second pillar around supporting and engaging with civil society. A really key one, which again is very much cross-cutting, is about increasing civil society's participation. You see this as the light green bullet, the sixth bullet. How to do so? Well, by engaging in structured and inclusive dialogue with civil society, both in your home country and in partner countries. Now, I understand that this is something Latvia is already undertaking with Latvian CSOs, so that's fantastic. Congratulations on that. And admittedly, again, this is an area where it's not always readily done by providers in a really cross-cutting, cross-policy way. Sometimes it's seen as being, well, this is the business of the civil society partnerships people, whereas, really one would ideally want to be hearing from and exchanging with civil society when it comes to all types of policies and programs. I would share with you not an example of a DAC member here, but of the DAC and the DCD itself. In 2018, the DAC adopted, approved a framework for dialogue between the DAC and CSOs. And this framework for dialogue, it's a short, 6-page document. It contains some minimum requirements for this participation and engagement with CSOs, such as there's an annual DAC CSO dialogue, but it also calls for integration of dialogue across DAC and DCD work, and we're seeing more and more of this happening. And one example is, the DAC Working Party on Development Finance Statistics has developed very specific modalities to regularly dialogue and share information with CSOs. And I'm going to give you one more example, and then shortly thereafter, I will stop talking. Sydney, are you giving me the, how many minutes has the 2 minutes been up, Sydney?
No, you have 1 minute and a half. I'll give you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so the last example, I would like to talk about this one. It's still in the under the second pillar. It's about investing in local ownership and leadership by civil society in partner countries, such as by supporting them directly or by ensuring domestic civil society partners are working with local civil society partners, so that civil society in partner countries is better able to sustain development intervention results in the long term, be accountable again to citizens and governments in partner countries, and doing that defending a civic space. And there's growing momentum around this issue of local civil society leadership. We're seeing a number of DAC members are asking themselves agency-wide or ministry-wide some tough questions about whether their civil society support has adequately contributed to developing a strong and independent and diverse civil society in partner countries. The US, for example, recently announced they are going to provide at least a quarter of all their funds directly to local partners. It's not just civil society partners. This is across the board, different types of partners within the next 4 years. And Sweden has also been working on a way to provide some kind of guarantees to their Swedish civil society partners to help reduce felt risk of partnering with civil society in partner countries. So the next slide is the third pillar. I'm not going to give you any examples under there. these things I've shared are just some examples. I want to note that our work at the DCD going forward involves developing toolkits to support DAC members and other adherents with implementation. And these toolkits will very much draw from the good practices and lessons that are out there. This to me, and I think to DAC members as well, is one of the benefits of a recommendation, is that support for implementation and learning across adherence is really already built in. You know, in the next slide, there are just a couple of events that are happening soon where, you know, any of you would be most welcome to join, where you could learn more about the recommendation, learn more about next steps that we're taking to support implementation and whatnot. Of course, the DAC is hopeful that other OECD members might be interested in adhering to the recommendation, and we're here to support that process if requested. Thank you very much. Sorry, I took more than.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, and of course, I encourage the colleagues, Latvian colleagues, to take a look at the recommendation, to follow on the work that will be done to implement it, and maybe also to adhere to the recommendation. And as an OECD member, that's completely possible. And I know the policy guidelines, the 2021-2027 guidelines, did not include the recommendation on civil society because it was just adopted over the summer. But I think in the guidelines, if I'm not mistaken, there are references or even mentions of kind of alignment with the previous two recommendation on the Nexus and on CI, if I'm not mistaken, in the guidelines. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, and I'll immediately turn to Marc, and I hope that the connection is better. I think we all have issues today from the OECD side because my VPN connection is I would say unstable to say the least. So I hope everyone will be able to see. Marc, I cannot see you, but I think I hear you.
Hi, Sydney. Yes, I'm calling in from my phone, and I now have at least I have a connection, but I cannot get my phone, my camera switched on somehow. It doesn't work. There's a conflict somewhere. Anyway, so, but I think we can proceed.
Perfect.
The content of the presentation is more important than seeing me. So good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for allowing to say a few words on how we monitor governance objectives across development cooperation, actually. So in the governance sector, we distinguish two kinds of measurements. One is the governance purpose codes, and in our credit reporting system, those are that's the subcategory 151, government and civil society, and the purpose codes under that one are considered as pure governance sector work. But there's of course also governance initiatives in other sectors across development cooperation that try to achieve governance objectives, and these are measured through what we call the governance marker. And until yesterday, because there's been a change yesterday, that was known as the participatory development and good governance marker. So that's one of the 12, I think, policy markers that the OECD DAC has. And all these policy markers are really meant to see to what extent certain policy objectives are pursued across development cooperation. So this one, the PDGG marker, as we call it, or called it, was approved in January '97 as one of the first policy markers. There's 4 criteria to score a program.
Marc, just for your information, I'm showing the slides for you.
Okay, all right, yeah, I can see that on my screen. But so these 4 selection criteria So not any project that pursues one or more of these four areas or objectives can be scored for the policy marker. And the scoring is done through a 2-1-0 score. So 2 means that one of those four objectives is a principal objective of a program or of an intervention. A score 1 means that it is a significant part of a program, but not all of it. We can go to the next one, Sydney. So we've looked at recently at how DAC members are scoring their programs. And there we see actually that over the past 10 years, 2010, 2019, there's been a very stable, around 25% of all ODA actually that is scored for the governance market. That means that about a quarter of all development cooperation efforts also pursue, to some extent, governance objectives. In volume of money, that means about 35 to 40 billion US dollars a year on programs that at least partially tries to achieve governance objectives. Now, this volume needs to be qualified, because if you have a program in the education sector that also has a component of, let's say, $20 million, and it has a component of $1 million on institutional reform, it means that it has a governance objective, but in fact the full volume will be reflected, while it is not the full volume that will go to governance objectives. So in that sense, we need to look at these figures with a bit more nuance than they show at first sight. Then next one, when we look a little bit at in which sectors we pursue governance objectives, then we can see that it is most in the education, agriculture, and water and sanitation programs. I'm not sure to what extent that is clearly visible there, but the bottom part are the core governance of programs, and above are different subsectors. But it's education, agriculture, and water and sanitation where we find most regularly also parts of programs that pursue governance objectives. But if we look at the ones that change most over time, then we see that the energy and transport sector, and that I think is better visible even in the next slide, are the sectors where, in fact, there has been an increase of governance objectives over the past 10 years. So we can see here data for 2010, 2015, 2019, and the shift is highest, is biggest actually in energy and transport, also in absolute volume of money. So in fact, this marker is it's a bit of a blunt measure, but it's still the only measure that we have to see to what extent governance objectives are mainstreamed across development cooperation. Now, I said in the beginning of my presentation that we talked about the PDGG marker until yesterday. And in fact, over the past 2 years, we've been discussing in the governance network a reform of the marker. And we tried, many members found that the marker as it was a bit outdated. So we've worked on a reform in consultation with our members, and it will now be called the Democratic and Inclusive Governance Marker. So we will look much more to what extent these parts of governance, actually, democracy promotion and inclusive governance promotion, are pursued throughout development cooperation. So it means a bit of a break with the past, that we will not have these continued lines as I have shown you, but it is a way of trying to make the marker more up-to-date and more relevant for us and for members and for external users. That change was approved yesterday in the WP Stat meeting. So we can now start working on guidance to help the different statistics departments of our members to score programs. One of the big changes is also that there will no longer be what we call automatic attribution. So far, there were all programs under 16 selected purpose codes were automatically attributed a score 2, and that also inflated artificially actually the governance marker. So that will end. There was no real guidance for members on how to score and what to score, what is in, what is not in for the marker. And we will now, in the coming months, develop a much more solid guidance that can help departments to score. And so far, it was very difficult to actually find also on the OECD platforms data on the marker. Even for us, it's a time-consuming exercise to extract PDG or governance market data. And we are now working on a platform actually to increase the access, make the access to those data easier available. I think I can stick to that, but happy to take any questions if there are. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Marc, and thank you for also this that we can define that as the latest development from yesterday. So I think that's also quite interesting, and I'm sure that we look forward to also all the guidance that will be provided for the OECD DAC community to integrate those new markers in their reporting, but also in their practice, as we've seen throughout the day that markers also play a key role in from the definition to the implementation of programs. But let me turn right away to Mrs. Keller for her presentation on the Swiss approach and how does governance as a transversal theme actually takes place in the Swiss Development Corporation.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me, Sydney?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much for inviting us to present how we work on governance as a transversal approach. I don't know, will you screen or shall I?
As you prefer, really, either way is good for me. Should I do it?
Maybe you do it.
Okay, perfect.
And on
Please
Zoom,
go ahead.
so yeah. So I do it. Okay.
No, I do it. Don't worry. You can start, and I'll show it to everyone right now.
Okay. So for us, you can then immediately switch to slide 2. For us, governance is a transversal theme, and it's actually part of how we look at governance and how we approach governance through our work. And one of the slides that will come soon shows a little bit the overview of our governance pillars. And you will see we frame it that we actually have like 4 pillars that more are the governance core topics, like democratic governance, participation, accountability. For example, the whole topic on civil society, civic space would enter into that pillar. Then SDC has a strong focus on decentralization and local governance, the multi-level aspect, then also combating corruption. And as a rather new, we're still also in the exploration, is on digital governance. What are the issues from a governance perspective? That was very interesting. I listened a little bit in the previous session. And then we framed actually governance as a transversal topic, as a pillar 5 that is cross-cutting as a lever, working on governance throughout our core topics, but also through all intervention in all sectors. And maybe to the next slide. And the question also why governance as a transversal theme, I think the comprehensive approach, and I think Agenda 2030 very much also states that it is a standalone goal per se with SDG 16, but it is as much a means and a lever for achieving all SDGs. Similar approach we might use when we talk about gender, etc. So I think for governance is as much true. So it's a matter of effectiveness in the our overall SDG and sustainable development agenda, but then it's also really a precondition for having better results in each single sectors. A water sector with bad governance simply does not deliver good results, not good services for the people as the end users, we may say. We, in our experience, have been saying that actually very often we go to governance almost as an adaptive strategy. In the more and more difficult context, be it a fragile context, autocratization, where it might become difficult to work directly on specific issues, governance through sectors can be an adaptive strategy on how you work on issues, but you work on it on a more practice-based, with different, maybe not with national, but with local actors on specific issue. You introduce aspect of governance, so it can be a useful adaptive strategy as well. And at the end, it's always also about having a really comprehensive approach. Marc just said it's about principle and significance. So it's like two ways to go about it. We can have a very targeted approach on a specific governance issue, but we can also work transversally through sector. But for us, comprehensive, and we think to that, basically, it always has to go a little bit hand in hand. It's not, in some contexts, it might be either or, but very often it's hand in hand, it's both. And finally, for us, it's also very much comprehensive in the way we work, in how we work. So the how is the what, very systemic thinking, because at the end of the day, we all know it's not so much that we do the right thing, but maybe we have the wrong approach on how to go about it. So there's very much also the way how we approach. Do we really look at the context? Do we really look what the actors and partners on the ground think and need, etc. So next slide. So one, for us, a very important basis on framing governance as a transversal topic is the governance principle. It's principles that are all known and understandable. SDC has established them as a basic understanding within the institution on that are key issues, principles for good governance. You see them, it's around accountability, transparency, rule of law, non-discrimination, participation, effectiveness, efficiency. So it's these, they are interlinked, they're in different things. So these are kind of like the underground or how we look at governance, and they are important reference to think about governance as a transversal topic. We would, I maybe go to the next slide. We would still call it a systemic approach. So it's not only about thinking, so how can I strengthen transparency in that and that program, but really think of it as a systemic approach, which means look at the overall governance system. For example, in the water sector. So what are the regulations? Is it decentralized? How is the money flows? Who are the actors? What motivations? So it's looking really at the whole thing, at the overall governance system, and then look at, so how does it, if we look at our governance principle, what are the issues? What are the problems? Where do we have gaps? Where do we have things that somehow don't work? How do they relate? So the governance principles are very much to assess the quality on how things work. And then as a third step, it's really about thinking and working politically to understand what are underlying power dimensions should work. I think it was in a previous presentation also, if we interfere, if we try to improve governance, it's also always about changing certain power structure, certain interests. And that doesn't go, you have some supportive and you will, those that fear, they lose something. So you should know about this. One cannot go into naive or just think this is only a technical approach. It might be in the forefront, a technical approach, but at the end, there is a political power dimension within it, and one better understands on how to deal with it. So this is when it comes to our systemic understanding, that we really have to look at the whole system. We have to understand how could we improve within that governance, but then also what would it really mean from a more political reading of the situation. So that's just as a systemic approach. And maybe on the next slide, I would go, so then how would we do this very practical? Because then our offices also would say, so what do we have to do? Because governance as a transversal topic is actually compulsory in SDC. So everybody should apply it. So it's here we try to translate it as very practical steps. It's basically applying the PCM. It's the PCM applying it with the governance lens. So if you are analyzing the issues, the problems, the challenges you have, so it's about, so what we can again use the water sector as an example. So what are actually the problems, or what are issues that you think you need to address in the water sector system reform or whatever, and see what of these problems are maybe governance related. What are the issues that we should try to get together with partners and to work on? And here also it means always be pragmatic when we talk an analysis. I'm not claiming that SDC is doing for every program an additional and separate analysis on governance. There is always much out there. So there are a lot of people who already know a lot. So sometimes it's just bringing people together and say, look, we have discussed now a whole morning about how we want to address this governance thing. But let's now dedicate 1 hour. What are underneath the governance issues? So I think it's very much when you work on mainstreaming, if you want to have take on board your colleagues from the field, including your implementing partners, you really have to think a lot about how you translate your, I started with our concept and conceptual understanding. You have to invest a lot in, so what does it mean very concretely in specific programs, contexts, situations? How can you do it? And what are very pragmatic steps without losing content? And sometimes by going pragmatic, you actually gain content. So step 2 is then very PCM type, define entry points. What would be your objective? Where do we have leverage? You might think about do no harm or avoiding conflicts. If you say, we have to reduce corruption in the sector. This is a good objective, but you might better understand, well, what are the issues around corruption? And for me, maybe what's important again is dialogue with partners on governance. If you have a good document and putting all indicators, that doesn't tell you how much this will be implemented. So a common understanding what you mean with governance as a transversal topics in that specific context is basically the key thing. So one has to understand who are those partners. Would they actually support this? Are they understanding the logic, or are they actually the ones asking for it? So I think important to dedicate on the dialogue with partners, be them governmental, non-governmental, different types. And then also there are issues around resources, capacity building. When we talk about the transversal topics, it's not the governance specialists we're working with, but it might be the water specialists, it might be the education people, health people. So it takes a time to establish a dialogue, to come to a common understanding. They know a lot. They probably also know what are the governance problems, but they wouldn't frame it this way. So there is a certain dialogue with your own staff. You need some resources, some guidance, and capacity building taking place, be it within your office, be it with partners as well. And I think that, like, for me, step 4 and 5 are really the real building blocks when you want to take transversal topics seriously. So it's not just the guidance and the concept you have, but really investing in taking along the stakeholders when you implement this. What also is an issue, for example, in our case, sometimes the governance people who work on governance program, the long-standing local governance, etc., they don't really feel responsible for mainstreaming governance in all other programs. That's not their understanding, and that's actually not the way how they look at it. So it is really about also shaping who is then responsible for it, who has this overview. And that, if that is not clearly defined, that's also often a source for failure if nobody is really in charge. So so there is issues around how you organize your resources, you make capacity building responsibilities, assign responsibilities for a topic in this whole circle of when we mention these as practical steps. We go to the next slide, which is my final slide. So I come now at the end where, Marc, you heard I don't have to introduce, luckily, the policy marker, but because what Marc presents, it's the end, I call it the end game. When you have all those data and then you can analyze and then you can steer and pull out all these interesting results. But first, you have these markers getting marked. So you have every program have somehow to sign and to tick those boxes. Is this now governance focused program? Is it a principle? Is it significant? And so you need some policy within your institution, how you apply this in a systematic and consistent way. So to assure some minimal data quality that then can be delivered to the DAC for the aggregation across all the development data. So we have a policy market checklist that has to be filled out together with the project documents. We have some institutional target values that serve as internal steering area. We did now differentiation with humanitarian aid to have a little bit lower values. They're still under discussion. Is that correct or not? But in reality, they have been applying it not so much, not that much, because was not much established. So there needs certain policies and systems in place to actually use and apply the policy market in a consistent way. And there are much issues around there. I think also there, one can roll out, make such a rollout in a very bureaucratic way, or handle it with a certain pragmatism, but always focus on it's not only about the institutional accountability to fulfill, but actually we should really also care what is the result in our programs we achieve by doing that. And finally, we have a set of governance indicators that are kind of SDC, overall thematic indicators on governance. These are other possibilities for monitoring and on governance specific results throughout our programs. So I would stop here. That's just a very short glimpse on how we understand governance through social topic and how we try to implement it in practical ways in our programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ursula. I think your focus on the practicality is really welcome, and that reminded me a few years back when I was working with the Belgian Development Corporation and kind of working on their fragile strategy. There was the initial strategy, which it's great, but then when you talk to colleagues at HQ or in the field, they're like, okay, but what does that mean for me concretely in my daily life and my daily work, in my daily processes? What does that mean to integrate that kind of fragile, sensitive approach, which is a bit close to the governance that I mentioned also? But thanks so much for this really clear kind of process and clear question throughout the way. We're running a bit late, but I want to give the floor right away to Sara Giannotte from LAPAS to provide some reflection, comment, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time for questions before closing. And apologies, we'll close, I think, a bit 10 minutes late.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone. I'm Sara from LAPAS. I'm going to share with you a very short presentation. Shall I share the presentation?
Please.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as it concerns LAPAS was born in 2004, same year when Latvia joined the Europe. LAPAS believes that Latvia's transition experience to a democratic market economy can be useful to others, and hence LAPAS aims to connect local with global. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe can you just put the presentation in full screen mode? So just start the presentation so that you will be so we can see it fully.
Yes. Wait. Okay. I don't know which is the problem.
Otherwise, just leave it like that. It's fine. Okay, just you can show it again.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
So nowadays, societal resilience is the third age of security, and for this reason, LAPAS choose to focus on societal resilience for different motivations. The first is that new global challenges require systematic approach at all levels. Moreover, society, especially local communities, have important role in the situation of crisis and crisis preventions. And moreover, cognitive resilience and fight against disinformation is an integral part. And also technology serve for or against resilience. Hence, LAPAS priority are a current and sustainable development at global level, multi-stakeholder partnership for development as at national level, resilient communities at local level, and global competencies at individual level. As it concerns the relationship between resilience and human rights, nowadays it is important to take in consideration that the global challenges reduce rights at local and national level, and they can be used also as an excuse for reduction of rights. Moreover, individuals and communities can build their resilience beyond existing legal frameworks of rights, and also resilience can prevent conflict and right abuses. And moreover, investment in resilience is a long-term investment in peace and security and human rights and democracy. We can link this to our experience in Belarus. Indeed, in Belarus, pandemics has been used to close borders and restrict free movement, and also for the falsification of evidence and an unjust treatment of citizens. But we have to say that on the other side, the use of technologies has been important to improve mobilization of civic activism and transparency, and also for the documentation of human rights abuses. Then also local community activism and activism have been important and are important to continue political and civic mobilization. So the key is that individual and community level skills for resilience, and whether the challenge is that not all development projects were stopped due to huge level of human rights abuses. Taking then in consideration human rights and resilience in the development project, is important to have an holistic view of the environment at all levels. So family, community, civil society, national and local actors, also following universal human rights principles. Moreover, also it is important the realization of rights of the excluded and marginalized populations, giving priority for people suffering discrimination and disadvantages. Also then the implementation of institutionalization of local and national democratic processes and participatory processes, enabling environment instead of directive development. Moreover, we have to making project information available in accessible formats and local languages, including also minority languages, and strengthening capacity for data collection and analysis for monitoring of human rights. And at least it is important to support civic education, communication campaigns, law reform, and institutional strengthening to foster non-discriminatory attitudes and behavior change. And at the end, we have to say that when we try to involve human rights in development project, also some mistakes may occur. For example, human rights abuse might and should stop or freeze aid flows and development programs. Also, a violation might lead to a further violation or the deterioration of other rights. Moreover, we could have unexpected outcomes and potentially produce more violence. And then the human rights-based approach is less effective in the context of rural areas, and also it tends to make development debate and action more political. And then the human rights-based approach sometimes promote non-sustainable use of natural resources. And okay, that's all from our experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I think that provides really, I would say, comprehensive entry points for the mainstreaming of governance in the policy guidelines, or the guidelines that are being developed by the Latvian colleagues. Maybe I'll open the floor for a very brief question, if there are any from the audience. And I don't see any, but maybe I'll just ask Ursula one question on the kind of major challenges, to bring that governance dimension within the system and how do you create kind of awareness on the importance of the topic internally and transversally somehow, because you were mentioning that for example, the example of water, and that you sometimes I mean, in the implementation of the project, it is with experts on water from the partner country, but also I'm guessing from HQ side. How do you kind of make sure that that SDC staff is aware, that is integrating those dimensions in their own practice?
Thank you for the question. I think what is really important when we talk about transversal approaches, I mean, and for example, with governance, of course, it's very broad. And you have seen we have a very systemic approach. So it could be about many subtopics of governance, and we are talking. So we have the focus really more on like in essential governance dimensions that we want to look at. There's a lot about, for example, accountability. Almost every sector, how do you create participative decision-making process, a certain way of accountability where actually the human right-based approach comes in too. So I think it needs a dialogue on these issues, not only among the governance people, but really it needs close cooperation with your sector specialists. And there, it's also a way on how do you lead that dialogue. You can just send them the checklist and say, you have to fill out this checklist, which is the recipe for failure, of course. So you better also, I mean, you have to create platforms where you actually have time, where you can exchange it. It's really an cross-thematic, cross-sectoral dialogue. You have to establish these things. And also from a governance person, I mean, you should, I mean, there's a lot to learn when you sit and once you have to understand, so how does the sector actually work? What are actually the approaches? How do they work? They work, you find out they probably do already quite a lot on governance, but they wouldn't name it like this. So I think it's about discovering jointly also, so what are the issues that we think we want to reinforce, or we could highlight within the sector that are key leverage point game changers within the sector. So, and I think through this dialogue, you also avoid of just having a lot of checklists. We have some participative activity, we have a little bit this, but just go with a problem-based approach into it. And the more you engage with each other, the more you understand what are the issues on both sides, the more you can actually then find strategic ways on addressing it that could make a difference. So I think that's for me one of the important ways. And then I think you also overcome potential barriers, because there is always barriers when the headquarter is coming with, again, another checklist, no? So you have, because I've been for a long time gender focal point. So with gender, we paved the way. We are specialists in mainstreaming, but we also know the word gender fatigue. So I think with those topics, just be strategic, keep a good balance between institutional accountability, but also focus strategic way and take your colleagues serious. It's not that they don't understand, they just have another way of looking at it. So that would be some very practical experience.
Thank you so much, and I think that's a great ending to our session and to the discussion. We already running late, but I'd like to again thank all the speakers: Ursula, Sara, Marc, Jacqueline, and all the colleagues that have joined this afternoon. And before we officially close, I'd like to indeed give back the floor to Director Baloede for some closing words. We're trying to get in touch with Anna. I think we have the technological problems have reached to Anna too. So we'll see if she's able to connect back. Otherwise, I'll just say a few words. But Director, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sydney. Labvakar vēlreiz.
Good evening, Jacqueline, once more. We really had a very saturated day of discussion, exchanging our ideas about horizontal priorities, and starting from political planning and ending with a very practical examples. I would like to express my gratitude to all the speakers for all the experience and the discussion raised. I think it will be a great input in a Latvian platform for developing the guidelines. and there were several particular points. Just like yesterday, we understand that horizontal priorities are not the final goal. It's just a part of the bigger picture. And I totally agree with Anna's comment about example of different conditions, how through the cooperation we can strengthen other priorities like climate cooperation. Also, it supports other kind of cooperation among different countries. And all the horizontal priority questions and digitalization, gender equality, etc., they are also targets themselves, and there's very important how they are affected by a certain project. And I deeply hope that the direct results of the seminar will be obvious quite soon in the next tender for the grant project. And all the project authors will evaluate these criteria in their projects. These two seminars have given us a lot of inspiration. Therefore, I'm deeply grateful all the directorate, OECD director team. I also appreciate the work also from the Latvian side for the preparation of the seminar. And thanks also to our interpreters, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will continue to organize this kind of events and projects. And we thank Latvian cooperation policy implementers and in support. Thanks you once more. Have a nice good evening you all, and I hope to see you all soon online or offline, and till the next time.
Thank you so much, Director, and I think you've said it. You've said it all. I'll just again, indeed, thank both our teams. I think they've been really great, and Linda from our side on the technical dimension, which has been a bit more difficult this afternoon, but also Anya, Valentina, and everyone also from your side, Zana, Data, that have been really important to the preparation and to discussion. We've discussed this these seminars for quite a long time, and that's been part of the increasing partnership and collaboration we've had between our teams and between the OECD and Latvia, and we really kind of really rejoice to that partnership and collaboration, which has been really fruitful and really interesting, also to learn from the Latvian colleagues. We look forward to the next steps. I think this discussion on mainstreaming was I think fascinating in many different aspects and very rich, but also showing the kind of balancing that it requires, balancing between kind of the institutional accountability and the kind of flexibility, balancing between ensuring the priorities are there, but without overburdening also the implementers, and all kind of balancing in these mainstreaming dimensions. And we've gone through 4 of them today, and we could do even more in the next sessions. But I think there are common elements that have been raised in terms of at the different stages, in terms of coherence, in terms of results framework, in terms of involving actors. I think that's been really common messages around. I won't be longer than that. Again, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you for the Latvian speakers that have taken the time, and thank you for all the participants who have joined for this long 2 days of seminar, but really interesting ones from our side. So thank you so much. Have a great end of day, and looking forward to another occasion.